My sister Natalie always dreamed about the perfect wedding, perfect dress, perfect venue, perfect guest smiling in the front row. What she didn't know was that I had spent the last 3 months preparing something else. Because that wedding wasn't just her big day, it was the perfect stage, the perfect audience, and the perfect moment to expose 10 years of lies she thought no one would ever uncover. Growing up, Natalie was what my parents called the star. She was charismatic, confident, the kind of person who could make strangers laugh within 5 minutes of meeting them. People remembered Natalie, teachers praised her, relatives adored her. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one, the responsible one, which meant something strange happened in our family dynamic. Natalie created problems. I solved them. Natalie forgot things. I remembered them. Natalie chased attention. I handled consequences. At the time, I didn't resent it. I thought that was just how sisters worked. 10 years after college, Natalie announced her engagement. Her fiancé, Daniel, seemed like a genuinely good person, successful, calm, the type of man who believed the stories Natalie told about her life. And Natalie told many stories about her career, her investments, her growing consulting business. Everyone believed them, including Daniel. But I knew something was wrong, because I knew what Natalie's real life looked like. The first lie revealed itself during a family dinner. My aunt proudly told Daniel that Natalie had been managing high-profile marketing clients for years. Natalie smiled, nodded, accepted the praise. But there was one problem. Natalie had lost that job 2 years earlier. She never told anyone. She just kept pretending she still worked there. That moment stuck in my mind, because it was such a casual lie, so comfortable, so practiced. A few weeks later, curiosity got the better of me. I checked the company website. Natalie's name wasn't listed anywhere, not in staff directories, not in archived employee pages. Then I contacted someone I knew who worked there. Their response shocked me. Natalie had been fired 2 years earlier for falsifying client reports. Yet she had spent those 2 years telling everyone she had been promoted, including her fiancé. That was the moment something clicked in my mind. If Natalie could lie that easily about her job, what else was she lying about? At first I tried to ignore the thought, because investigating your own sister feels strange. But the more I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I became. Natalie's stories never quite matched reality. Her financial success seemed suspicious. Her lifestyle didn't match the income she claimed. Eventually, curiosity turned into something else, concern. And concern eventually turned into investigation. Natalie often bragged about owning her condo. She told everyone she had purchased it herself after years of smart investing. But property records told a different story. The condo belonged to a rental company. Natalie wasn't the owner. She was the tenant. Yet she had spent years telling people she was a property owner, including Daniel. One lie could be harmless. 2 lies could be embarrassment. But by the time I discovered the third lie, I realized something much worse was happening. Natalie wasn't exaggerating. She was constructing a completely fictional version of her life, and everyone believed it. 5 years earlier, I had shared a startup idea with Natalie, a consulting service designed for small online retailers. She had laughed about it back then, said it sounded complicated. A year later, Natalie announced her own consulting company, with the exact same concept. At first, I thought it was coincidence, until I saw her investor presentation. It was my work, my slides, my research, even the same color scheme. She had simply removed my name, That was the moment I realized something terrifying. Natalie hadn't just been lying. She had been stealing pieces of other people's lives to build her own. And if she had stolen from me, I needed to know how far the lies actually went. Once I started looking, I couldn't stop. That's the problem with discovering someone's first serious lie. It changes the way you hear everything after it. Every sentence becomes a possible performance. Every achievement becomes suspicious. Every funny little story starts sounding like a carefully edited press release. And Natalie? Natalie had always been very good at press releases. She knew how to tell a story that made people lean closer, how to place herself at the center without seeming obvious about it, how to sound vulnerable just long enough to earn sympathy, before pivoting back to admiration. For years, I thought that was just charisma. Now I realized it was something else. Curation. The Natalie my family believed in was easy to summarize. She was successful, stylish, independent, a self-made woman with a demanding consulting career, a beautiful condo, and a fiancé who adored her. The Natalie I was starting to uncover looked different. Unemployed for 2 years, living beyond her means, renting the condo she claimed to own, and running a consulting business built on work she stole from me. That should have been enough. More than enough. A normal person would have stopped there. A normal person would have confronted her, screamed at her, maybe exposed one or two things, and walked away feeling justified. But Natalie had spent too many years building this life. Too many years letting everyone believe she was the shining example in the family. If I confronted her too early, she would do what she always did: cry, deny, call me bitter. And because she was Natalie, half the room would still want to believe her. No. If I was going to do this, I needed the kind of truth that survives performance, the kind that doesn't need tone, the kind that sits on paper. I didn't tell my parents what I had found. I didn't tell Daniel either. Not yet. Instead, I called the only person I knew who cared more about facts than feelings. Mara. We had been friends since college. She was one of those rare people who could look at emotional chaos and immediately start organizing it into folders, literal folders, if necessary. She worked in compliance at a financial services firm and had a brain that seemed physically incapable of letting inconsistencies go. When I told her I thought Natalie had built a fake life, Mara didn't laugh, didn't say I was overreacting, didn't tell me to let it go because of the wedding. She just asked one question: how much proof do you already have? That question calmed me in a way sympathy wouldn't have, because sympathy makes pain softer, but strategy makes it useful. I know she lied about her job, I said. I know she lied about owning the condo, and I'm almost certain she stole the consulting business idea from me. Mara was quiet for a beat. Then she said, "That's not a messy sister problem anymore. That's a pattern." Exactly. A pattern. Natalie's lies weren't random. They were structural. They supported each other. The fake job justified the fake income. The fake condo supported the image of financial success. The stolen business story gave her ambition, intelligence, and the illusion of entrepreneurship. She hadn't just lied, she had built an ecosystem. And ecosystems collapse best when you remove the load-bearing beams. Mara helped me find the next crack. At first, it looked boring. A county court filing, then another, then two more. Civil claims, debt disputes, one from a credit issuer, one from a private lender, one from a collection agency, and one from a company I recognized immediately. Because Daniel had mentioned them once over dinner. An investment recovery firm. My stomach tightened the second I saw the name. Because suddenly the lies weren't just cosmetic anymore. Natalie wasn't pretending to be successful while quietly getting by. She was drowning, quietly, aggressively, and doing it in a way that would explode spectacularly if the wrong person ever looked closely. Mara pulled what she could from public records and built a rough estimate. At minimum, Natalie had somewhere between $180,000 and $220,000 in unresolved debt. I stared at the spreadsheet in silence. That much debt doesn't just appear, it accumulates through panic, vanity, denial, and a near religious commitment to image. It also means one very important thing. Anyone who still believed Natalie was financially thriving wasn't just misinformed, they were being manipulated. One debt filing had a note attached from a private mediation summary. Not all of it was accessible, just enough. Enough to suggest Natalie had personally guaranteed part of a business contract she could never afford. And the date on that filing mattered, because it fell 6 months after her engagement to Daniel. Meaning whatever financial disaster she had built it while planning a wedding and still saying yes when people praised her stability. Then Mara found another record, a personal loan, recent, large, issued under terms that only made sense if the lender believed her business had substantial active contracts. It didn't. I knew it didn't. Which meant she had lied on the application, and the application likely used some version of the business plan she stole from me. I sat back from my laptop and felt my pulse in my throat. If that was true, Natalie hadn't just stolen my idea and turned it into a fake success story. She had monetized the lie, borrowed against it, possibly dragged Daniel's reputation, or money, into it. That thought hit me hard enough that I had to stand up and walk away from the desk. Because suddenly, this wasn't just about old resentment and personal betrayal. This was active fraud sitting inside a wedding registry. I thought my sister had lied to impress people. Then I found the loan. And I realized Natalie hadn't just built a fake life. She had built it on money that wasn't really hers. And there was a very real chance her fiancé was already tied to it. The worst part about investigating someone you love through someone else's lies is that every discovery creates a moral problem. Because with every new piece of truth, I had to decide, do I tell Daniel now? Do I wait? Do I risk becoming the bitter sister who tries to ruin the engagement? Or do I say nothing and let him legally tie himself to a woman who might be a financial time bomb? Mara's opinion was clear. If he's financially exposed, he deserves to know. I knew she was right, but timing matters. And if I came to Daniel too early with a collection of half-finished suspicions, Natalie would do exactly what she always did. She would act wounded, offended, humiliated that I was trying to sabotage her happiness. And Daniel, being decent, would want to be fair. He would ask for explanations. He would create space for context. He would invite nuance into a situation that didn't deserve it yet. No, I needed more. Not because Daniel wasn't smart. Because Natalie was slippery. She had spent 10 years rehearsing this version of herself. I had spent 3 months unlearning it. That was not enough to win with emotion alone. So I kept digging. I found out by accident. Or almost by accident. One Sunday at my parents' house, my mother was excitedly talking about wedding logistics and honeymoon options and all the expensive little fantasies people project onto happy couples. Then my aunt, who had never mastered the art of strategic silence, said, "Well, at least Daniel believes in Natalie's business." The room didn't react. No one else understood what I heard inside that sentence. I forced my voice to stay casual. What do you mean? My aunt smiled. Oh, she told me he helped her expand. Isn't that wonderful? I felt the blood drain from my face. How did he help? My mother answered this time. He invested in her firm. Not a huge amount, I don't think, but enough to help her scale. Scale. My sister's imaginary success was now using startup vocabulary at family lunch. I think I managed to smile. I'm not sure, but I remember every sound after that feeling too sharp. Forks on plates, ice in glasses, my father laughing at something I didn't hear. Daniel had invested. Money. Real money. In a business partially built from stolen work and possibly propped up by fraudulent claims. That changed the stakes instantly, because now Natalie wasn't just lying to impress him. She was taking from him. And if there was one thing I knew about decent men with generous instincts, it was this. They are easiest to exploit when they think they're helping someone they love. The reason I knew the business had started with me is because I still had the original files, or at least I thought I did. The slide deck, the market research, the rough service model for small online retailers who needed flexible brand support but couldn't afford large agencies. I had sent Natalie an early version years ago after a late-night conversation where she claimed she wanted real feedback on whether entrepreneurship was worth pursuing. At the time, I'd been flattered. Maybe she was finally taking something seriously. Maybe sharing an idea didn't always mean losing control of it. I dug through an old external hard drive and found the folder after midnight. When it opened, my breath caught. There it was. The deck. The naming brainstorm. The service tier structure. Even a draft pitch outline with the exact phrase Natalie had since repeated publicly in interviews and networking events. Boutique strategy for overlooked digital sellers. My phrase, my structure, my work. I clicked through file dates, timestamps, metadata. The oldest version predated her business by over a year. And then, tucked inside the folder, there it was. The email. Still archived. Sent to Natalie. Subject line. Thoughts on this idea? Don't laugh. I stared at the screen so long my eyes blurred. Because there's something especially brutal about finding proof of a betrayal you once tried to classify as coincidence. Once coincidence dies, what remains is intention. And intention has a much uglier face. I wasn't the first person Natalie had done this to. I just didn't know that yet. Mara found her. An old LinkedIn trail led to a woman named Isabel Monroe, who had briefly co-founded something with Natalie 7 years earlier. The business dissolved in under a year. Its digital traces were sparse, but not gone. When I reached out, Isabel didn't answer for 2 days. Then she sent one line. If this is about Natalie lying again, call me. We spoke that night, and every minute of that conversation made the back of my neck go cold. According to Isabel, Natalie had always done the same thing. Find someone with structure, ideas, discipline, then attach herself to the work until she could retell it as her own. She inflated client lists, promised deliverables that didn't exist, borrowed against future projections that were mostly fiction, and when things started to crack, she left someone else holding the mess. Why didn't anyone say anything? I asked. Isabel laughed softly. Because she's excellent at choosing people who are too embarrassed to tell the story. That line hit hard, because it was true. Who wants to say, publicly, I was manipulated by someone this charming? People think being conned requires stupidity. It doesn't. It often just requires trust, plus timing. Isabel told me one last thing before we hung up. Natalie doesn't just lie to look impressive. she said. She lies when she's cornered, and weddings corner people financially. I stared at the dark window beside my desk after that call, because if Natalie was already in debt, already lying, already using Daniel's investment to prop up the image, then the wedding might not just be a celebration, it might be cover. That was when I stopped asking whether I should reveal the truth at the wedding. The real question became something else. How much damage would Natalie do before the wedding day arrived, if nobody stopped her first? And the answer came faster than I expected. Because a week later, I found out she was lying to Daniel about me too. I learned through my mother. As always, the truth arrived accidentally, through someone trying to smooth things over. My mother called one evening and said, in that careful tone she uses when she wants to disguise a warning as concern, "I think you should try to be warm with Daniel. Natalie says he's worried you don't like him." That made me go still. What exactly did Natalie tell him? A pause. Then, just that you've always been competitive with her. There it was. Of course. My sister wasn't just building a false life. She was preloading my role inside it. Bitter sister, jealous sister, difficult sister. The one who might cause drama out of insecurity. Not because it was true, because if the truth ever came from me, Daniel would already have a framework for dismissing it. That's how good liars work. They don't just tell positive stories about themselves. They build defensive stories about the people most likely to expose them. I ended the call and sat there in silence for a long time, because that changed everything. Now it wasn't enough to be right. I had to be undeniable. Until then, I had been collecting evidence like someone building toward eventual clarity. After that call, the wedding became a hard deadline, because once Natalie married Daniel, the legal, financial, and emotional damage she could cause would grow exponentially. Shared assets, shared liability, shared trust. Marriage isn't just romance. It's infrastructure. And infrastructure built on lies tends to collapse on everyone underneath it. I opened a notebook and wrote across the top of the first page, "Before the wedding." Then I started listing what I had and what I still needed. I had proof she lied about her job, proof she lied about the condo, proof she stole my business concept, evidence of major hidden debt. Likely proof Daniel invested testimony from Isabel. What I needed: confirmation of the investment, proof of misrepresentation to lenders, or Daniel proof she was actively lying about me. A reveal structure she couldn't cry her way out of. That last one mattered most, because Natalie had spent her whole life surviving consequences by becoming the most emotional person in the room. If I wanted the truth to win, it couldn't look like revenge. It had to look like documentation. Not, "my sister says," not, "I think." Facts, dates, records, receipts. Something people could hold in their hands while her performance collapsed beside it. That's when I realized the wedding wasn't just a convenient stage. It was strategically perfect. Everyone Natalie needed to impress would already be there. Family, friends, colleagues, investors, Daniel. One room, one story, one chance. And if I did it right, she wouldn't just lose face. She would lose the fake life she had built on other people's trust. I thought I was preparing to expose my sister's lies. Then I found the one lie big enough to destroy the entire wedding in a single sentence. And it wasn't about her job, or the condo, or even the debt. It was about Daniel, and the reason she was really marrying him. The answer was sitting in a spreadsheet, which feels wrong somehow. You expect big revelations to arrive in dramatic phone calls, or overheard confessions, or handwritten notes hidden inside old drawers. Not in a spreadsheet. Not in a line item highlighted yellow at 1:14 a.m. while your coffee goes cold and your eyes burn from staring at numbers too long. But that's where it was. Mara had helped me cross-reference the public debt filings, the business loan timelines, and what little we could infer about Natalie's spending patterns based on the image she sold online. Then she did something I should have thought of myself. She compared the acceleration of Natalie's visible wedding planning with the acceleration of her financial distress, deposit deadlines, vendor commitments, travel previews, designer fittings. Everything grew more lavish at the exact same moment her financial structure became more unstable. That, by itself, wasn't proof of anything beyond terrible judgment. The real clue came when Mara overlaid Daniel's likely investment window. At some point during their engagement, Natalie stopped acting like someone trying to stabilize a struggling business. She started acting like someone who believed she had secured a permanent backer. The money shifted. The pressure changed. The urgency vanished from the debt pattern for a short period, as though a new source of confidence had entered the system. Mara stared at the timeline and said quietly, "She's not marrying from a place of stability. She's marrying for rescue." I looked at the screen and felt sick. Because if she was right, and she usually was, then Daniel wasn't just in love with a liar. He was being acquired. His kindness, his reputation, his patience, his money. All of it had become part of Natalie's long-term solution, not a romance, a refinancing plan. Once I allowed that possibility into the room, the rest of her behavior made perfect sense. Why she had become so aggressively polished after the engagement. Why she suddenly pushed for a larger ceremony than she could realistically afford. Why she kept selling the narrative of her successful consulting firm so intensely, instead of letting marriage naturally shift the conversation. Because the wedding wasn't just symbolic, it was an exit ramp. If Natalie married Daniel before the debt and lies fully surfaced, then whatever happened next would no longer belong only to her. It would belong to them, their finances, their reputation, their home, their future. That's the genius of certain liars. They don't simply run from consequences. They merge with someone stable before the consequences arrive. And that realization changed the ethical balance of what I was doing. Up until then, I had still wondered, in weak moments, whether I was being cruel, whether exposing Natalie right before her wedding was too much, too public, too sharp, too unforgiving. But if she was knowingly leading Daniel into a legal and financial trap built from 10 years of deception, then silence wasn't kindness. Silence was participation. The next break in the case came from something Natalie once mocked me for: old email habits. I never delete things. Folders, archives, cloud backups, duplicate accounts I forgot existed but somehow kept active. Natalie used to call it digital hoarding. "Your inbox looks like a documentary about anxiety," she once told me. What she didn't understand was that digital hoarding is excellent for historical reconstruction. I started searching old inboxes for her name, for attachments, for anything tied to the consulting idea she stole from me years earlier. Most of what I found I had already seen. Then I found a thread I didn't remember. It was from 4.5 years earlier. Natalie had forwarded one of my old draft decks to herself from an address she later used for her so-called firm. Only she hadn't deleted the forwarding confirmation from one of the synced devices she once borrowed from me during a family trip. It was small, technical, easy to miss. But it mattered, because the timestamp proved direct transfer, not inspiration, not similarity, theft. I stared at the forwarding trail and felt a strange, cold satisfaction. Not joy. Not yet. Just the steadying feeling of a lie losing oxygen. Then there was an attachment under the forwarded thread. A separate document. One I hadn't opened before. The title was bland enough to be invisible. Notes. Pitch refinement inside. In Natalie's own words. Were comments to herself. How to present the concept as if it developed organically. Which pieces sounded too Claire? Which sections needed stronger language so investors wouldn't think she was the idea person? The sentence that made me sit back in my chair and close my eyes for a full minute was this. Need to make sure Daniel never hears Claire mention this first. Daniel. She was already thinking about him. Already anticipating the possibility that our worlds would intersect in ways she couldn't control. That meant one thing. Natalie didn't just steal the idea and move on. She spent years actively protecting it from me, and from any person whose opinion of her still mattered. Liars don't only build their own identities, they build everyone else's roles. And Natalie had been writing mine for years. After my mother's comment about competition, I started asking subtle questions through family channels. Not enough to raise alarms, just enough to map the narrative. Apparently, over the past 2 years, Natalie had told variations of the same story to multiple people. I was bright but intense, successful but resentful, quiet in a way that suggested judgment, supportive only when she was failing, distant whenever she was thriving, which was clever, really. If she painted me as bitter in advance, then any future criticism from me would look emotionally motivated rather than fact-based. My father had apparently once said, "Claire always took things too personally." That line landed harder than I expected, because it meant Natalie's work had succeeded not just with strangers, but with the people who should have known me best. And that's the real violence of long-term lies. They don't just distort the liar, they alter the emotional weather around the truth-teller, until her honesty sounds like mood. I found proof of his investment in the worst possible place. A vendor dispute email chain tied to one of Natalie's event planners. She had apparently used the consulting firm's business account to pay an initial wedding vendor deposit, then reversed the payment when liquidity tightened. The planner, not knowing how badly Natalie's financial life was stitched together, sent a sharp email threatening to escalate the issue to all named associated parties. Attached was a prior invoice bearing the business line, Natalie's firm branding, and an internal authorization reference. Under supporting guarantor, Daniel Mercer. There it was. Clean. Undeniable. He had signed something. Maybe not a blank check. Maybe not a full business guarantee. But enough. Enough to place his name beside a structure she had no right to represent the way she had. Enough to prove the wedding wasn't just emotionally dangerous for him, it was already financially entangled. My hands shook when I sent the file to Mara. She called 2 minutes later. "Do you understand what this means?" "Yes," I said quietly. "He's already in it." "Not just in it," she replied. "If she used false representations to get that guarantor support, she may have induced him under fraud." That word changed the air. Fraud is different from lying. Lying ruins trust. Fraud leaves paper. Paper survives tears. Paper survives parents asking for grace. Paper survives wedding makeup and trembling voices and the kind of softness that people like Natalie weaponize when cornered. Paper was exactly what I needed. That night, I almost called Daniel. Actually, almost. Phone in hand. His name lit on the screen. My thumb hovering. Because at some point, morality stops being abstract and becomes timing. How long do you let a good man walk toward a trap before silence becomes its own betrayal? But then I pictured Natalie, what she would do if Daniel confronted her too early, how quickly she would redirect, minimize, cry, confess to one or two harmless lies in order to preserve the larger fraud. Maybe even tell him I had been obsessed for years, that I was still unstable after what happened with my ex, that I couldn't stand seeing her happy. And because Daniel was decent, not stupid, decent, he would likely want to hear her out. He would try to be fair, and fairness, when deployed too early against a strategic liar, becomes an advantage for the liar. So I didn't call. I hated myself a little for that, but not enough to sabotage the only version of truth strong enough to survive her. A week later, another clue arrived from somewhere I didn't expect. A wedding photographer's assistant named Kendra emailed me, not because she knew about the fraud, because she knew something was odd. Apparently, Natalie had listed me as a family contact backup on several vendor forms months ago, probably out of habit or convenience. When a final payment issue triggered a verification sequence, Kendra contacted me first before realizing I wasn't actually coordinating anything. Her email was polite. "Hi, Claire. I think there may be some confusion with Natalie's billing account." That one sentence made my pulse jump. I called her immediately and kept my tone neutral. Kendra explained that the primary card on file had failed twice, and when the studio attempted to confirm identity details for the replacement authorization, Natalie became weirdly defensive. Then Kendra said the magic phrase. She kept changing the company name attached to the payment source. I went cold. "What company name?" Kendra read it off. It was the consulting firm, then a second name. A limited event strategy LLC I had never heard of, then a third. A personal holding entity, all tied to Natalie in some way, none of them clean, none of them stable. But the key detail was simpler than that. She was paying for a luxury wedding through collapsing shells, image layered over instability, layered over borrowed trust. And the event itself? The sacred, emotional, public ritual she was inviting everyone into was already financially rotten underneath. I thought Natalie's wedding was going to be the perfect stage to expose her lies. Then I realized something worse. If I waited too long, there might not be a wedding, because the whole thing was starting to financially collapse before the vows ever happened. And if Natalie sensed that, she might do what she always did when cornered. Find a faster lie. A bigger one even Daniel might not recover from. The ceremony wasn't the place. That became clear to me after 2 sleepless nights and 1 brutal conversation with Mara. "If you're going to do it," she said, "you need the maximum number of witnesses and the minimum chance she can stop you." The ceremony was too sacred, too easy to villainize interruption, too vulnerable to me looking like the unstable sister who couldn't let the bride have one day. But the reception? That was different. Public enough to matter, informal enough to redirect, and full of exactly the right people. Family who had enabled the mythology, friends who had repeated it, business contacts who had invested in the image, Daniel, who deserved the truth before signatures and shared liabilities became harder to unwind. If the truth came during the reception, then the wedding would not be ruined by jealousy. It would be interrupted by reality. That distinction mattered, not to Natalie, to everyone else. And when you're up against someone who has spent 10 years living through emotional impression management, everyone else is the battlefield. I built the speech backward. That sounds strange, but it was the only way. I knew the end first. I needed Natalie unable to deny the core facts. I needed Daniel holding evidence before she could reshape the room. I needed the guests to move from discomfort to comprehension in one emotional arc. Not scandal first, trust first, then fracture, then proof. So I structured it like a wedding toast. Warm memory, sister story, small laughs. Enough softness to let Natalie relax. Then pivot. Not accusation, pattern. My sister has always been good at telling stories. Then evidence. One lie that seems harmless, then another. Then the debt, then the business, then Daniel's investment. And finally the line that would end the room. She isn't marrying from love alone. She is marrying from collapse. I wrote it, deleted it, rewrote it. Not because I wanted to sound dramatic, because I needed it bulletproof, emotionally legible, legally cautious, impossible to dismiss as bitterness. Mara reviewed every sentence, twice. We built a packet for Daniel separately. A sealed envelope, concise timeline, source list, key documents. If the speech failed halfway, he would still have enough in hand to stop the fall from becoming permanent. That was the real mission. Not humiliation, containment. The humiliation would simply be what happened to a liar when the structure finally lost support. I saw Natalie one last time before the wedding at a dress fitting my mother insisted I attend. Even then, even standing on a raised platform in silk and strategic lighting, Natalie radiated control. She looked beautiful. That's the irritating thing about people like her. Beauty often makes others hesitate to attach ugliness to them. The consultant fussed around her waistline. My mother cried, and Natalie caught my eye in the mirror. For 1 second, our reflections held still together. Then she smiled. Not warmly, victorious, as if she had already reached the end and found herself crowned. "You've been so quiet lately," she said later, while the consultant stepped away. "I've been busy." She adjusted the edge of her sleeve. "I'm glad you're coming around." That phrase, coming around, as if reality had simply needed more time to accept her version of it. I looked at her and thought, "You have no idea." Then she said something that almost made me break the plan. "You know, Daniel says family matters to him more than anything." I kept my face neutral. "Good." She smiled wider. "It's nice to know some men still value loyalty." There it was, that word. Loyalty from a thief. Family from a saboteur. Love from a strategist. I nodded as though the sentence meant nothing, but inside, I felt all hesitation die, because Natalie wasn't just lying. She was dressing in white and calling herself sacred. And someone needed to stop that before the vows made her fiction harder to unwind. By then, I had enough to destroy the wedding. What I didn't expect was the final piece of proof arriving the night before. And when it did, it made my entire original plan look almost too gentle. Because it proved Natalie had lied not only about her life, but about the reason she said yes to Daniel in the first place. The final piece of the truth arrived the night before the wedding. Not dramatically, not through a confrontation, just a quiet message on my phone at 11:37 p.m. It was from Isabel, the former business partner Natalie had quietly destroyed years earlier. The message contained one sentence: "You need to see this before tomorrow." Attached was a screenshot, an email thread, dated 6 months earlier. The sender was Natalie. The recipient was someone I didn't recognize. But the content of the email made my hands start shaking. Natalie wrote, "Daniel is perfect for this situation. He's stable, respected, and trusts me completely. Once we're married, the financial pressure will be easier to manage." Below that message was a reply. Short, cold. "Just make sure the wedding happens before the creditors push harder." I read the exchange 3 times before the meaning fully settled in. Natalie hadn't just been lying about her life. She had chosen Daniel specifically as a financial solution. The next message in the thread made everything even worse. Natalie wrote, "After the wedding, the business problems won't matter. Once we combine things, everything stabilizes." Everything stabilizes. That sentence echoed in my mind because it confirmed what Mara suspected weeks earlier. Natalie wasn't marrying Daniel to build a life. She was marrying him to escape the one she had created. But the worst part of the email wasn't the lie. It was the person she was writing to. Because the recipient wasn't a banker or a business partner. It was the same private lender who had been trying to collect her debt. Natalie had been discussing the wedding like it was a financial strategy. The next morning, the venue looked exactly the way Natalie always imagined it. A beautiful garden ceremony, white chairs arranged in perfect rows, soft music drifting through the air. Hundreds of guests arriving in elegant clothes. Everything looked perfect. Natalie's dream wedding. But the dream only worked if no one knew the truth. I sat in the second row beside my parents. Natalie walked down the aisle wearing a breathtaking dress. Daniel stood at the altar smiling like the happiest man in the world. For a moment, a very small moment, I wondered if I should stop. If maybe Natalie would change. If maybe the lies would eventually collapse without my help. But then I remembered the email. Daniel wasn't walking into love. He was walking into a financial trap. And suddenly the decision felt very simple. After the ceremony, the reception moved to the ballroom. Guests laughed, champagne flowed, music filled the room. Natalie moved through the crowd glowing with confidence. Because in her mind, she had won. 10 years of lies had worked perfectly, but every perfect performance has one weakness. It depends on the audience believing the script. Eventually, the speeches began. Natalie's maid of honor spoke first, then Daniel's best man. Both speeches were emotional and warm. The crowd laughed and applauded. Natalie looked relaxed, happy, victorious. Then the host announced my name. The room grew quiet as I walked toward the stage. Natalie smiled at me from the head table, confident. Because in her mind, I was just another supporting character in her story, another person there to praise her. I took the microphone and looked around the room. Family, friends, colleagues, investors, and Daniel. All the people who believed Natalie's version of reality. I started exactly the way everyone expected. With Natalie, life has always been interesting. The crowd laughed softly. She's always had a gift for storytelling. Natalie smiled. The audience relaxed, because everything still felt like a normal wedding toast. Then I said something different. Growing up, Natalie was always the star. More laughter. But what people may not realize, I paused, is how good she became at creating stories. The room grew slightly quieter. Natalie's smile tightened, but no one understood yet. 2 years ago, Natalie told everyone she was promoted at her company. I looked around the room. She wasn't. Murmurs began spreading through the crowd. Natalie's expression froze. She also tells people she owns her condo. I paused again. But property records show it's rented. The whispers grew louder. Guests began glancing at each other. 5 years ago, Natalie launched a consulting business. I held up a printed document. The problem is the entire business model came from work she copied from me. Now the room had gone completely silent. Daniel stared at me in shock. Natalie looked like she couldn't breathe. Then I said the sentence that changed everything. The reason Natalie is marrying Daniel today? The entire ballroom seemed to hold its breath. is because she believes his money will solve the financial disaster she's been hiding. Gasps spread through the crowd. Daniel slowly stood up from his chair. I placed the sealed envelope on the table in front of him. Everything you need to understand the truth is in there. Daniel opened the envelope. He read the documents, the email, the debt records, the business files. The room watched silently as his expression changed. Shock, confusion, then realization. Finally, he looked at Natalie. Is any of this true? Natalie didn't answer. Because for the first time in her life, the story wasn't hers anymore. For 10 years, my sister built a perfect life out of lies. But lies have one fatal weakness. They survive only as long as no one tells the truth. And her wedding was the perfect place to finally do it. For a few seconds after Daniel opened the envelope, no one spoke. The ballroom was silent in a way that felt unnatural. Hundreds of people were standing there, but the only sound was the quiet rustle of paper as Daniel turned the pages. First the debt filings, then the investor presentation, then the email Natalie wrote about marrying him to stabilize the situation. Daniel read every line slowly, carefully, like someone trying to understand how their entire life had suddenly become unfamiliar. Across the table, Natalie's face had turned completely pale. Not embarrassed, not angry, afraid. Because for the first time in her life, she was losing control of the narrative. Natalie stood up quickly. This isn't what it looks like. Her voice trembled just enough to sound vulnerable, which had always been her most effective weapon. I can explain everything. She looked at Daniel, not at the crowd, at him. Because she knew the audience that mattered most was the one person who could still rescue her story. Claire has always misunderstood things, she said softly. There it was. The old strategy. Turn the truth into a misunderstanding. Turn the accuser into the emotional one. I was under a lot of stress, Natalie continued. The business had challenges. Everyone does. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Some people looked at me like they weren't sure who to believe, because Natalie wasn't panicking. She was performing. Then Natalie did something that had worked for her countless times before. She started crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quiet tears sliding down her face. I can't believe you would do this today, she whispered to me. The room filled with uneasy murmurs, because suddenly the situation looked different. Instead of a liar being exposed, it looked like a bride being humiliated. Natalie turned toward the guests. My sister has always been jealous of me. That sentence landed like a grenade. For a moment, the crowd seemed divided. Some people looked shocked. Others looked skeptical. But Natalie had done this her entire life. She knew exactly how to introduce doubt into a room. And for a few terrifying seconds, it looked like her strategy might actually work. Then Daniel said something that changed everything. Quietly, almost calmly. You told me the business was profitable. Natalie froze. You said investors were lining up. Silence. You told me the debt rumors were lies. Natalie's mouth opened, closed. Daniel lifted the final page from the envelope. The email says you plan to fix everything after the wedding. Now the room wasn't confused anymore. It was watching. Desperation appeared in Natalie's voice for the first time. Daniel, you know me. He didn't respond. You know the kind of person I am. Still nothing. Natalie's eyes moved around the room, searching, looking for support, for someone to defend her. But something strange had happened. The room had already begun to change sides, because lies can survive doubt, but they rarely survive evidence. Natalie's voice turned sharp. Fine. The words snapped through the ballroom. You want the truth? She looked directly at me. You ruined your own idea years ago. My stomach tightened. What? Natalie laughed bitterly. You were too scared to actually build the business. The crowd watched us carefully now. So yes, she continued, I took the idea and made something of it. That sentence made several guests whisper again, because suddenly Natalie sounded confident again, even proud. But Natalie didn't realize something. The envelope Daniel was holding wasn't the only evidence. I reached into my bag and placed another document on the table, a contract. Daniel looked down at it, confused. What is this? I answered calmly. It's the original registration paperwork. Natalie frowned. What paperwork? I looked at her. The company registration. The room grew silent again. Because 5 years ago, I continued slowly, I actually started the business. Natalie's expression shattered. Daniel read the document carefully. Registered owner, Claire Morgan. Date, 1 year before Natalie's company launch. That meant something very simple. Natalie hadn't built a business. She had built a fake version of one that legally belonged to someone else. The room erupted in whispers. Daniel looked at Natalie again. This time, there was no confusion in his face, only clarity. You lied about everything. Natalie said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Her perfect life had just collapsed in front of everyone she wanted to impress. Daniel removed the wedding ring slowly, then placed it on the table. I can't marry someone I don't recognize. Natalie looked like she might faint. The guests began leaving quietly. The band stopped playing. The perfect wedding dissolved into chaos. Later that night, after the ballroom had emptied and the decorations were already being taken down, I stepped outside into the quiet garden. Daniel walked out a few minutes later. He looked tired, but calm. Thank you, he said quietly, for telling the truth. I nodded. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel said something that stayed with me. 10 years of lies. He shook his head. And it all ended in one speech. My sister spent 10 years building a perfect life out of lies, but lies are fragile things. They survive only as long as no one exposes them, and her wedding was the perfect place to finally do it.